Hi, and welcome to part 2 of this week 3 presentation. Let's pick up where we left off in part 1 by continuing to take a look at our primary topics for the week. As mentioned in part 1 of this presentation, our second main topic for this week is dynamic access control. Remember, dynamic access control gives network administrators a way of securing and auditing access to and of information. According to Microsoft, dynamic access control allows administrators to do the following. Number 1, identify data by using automatic and manual classification of files. For example, you could tag data in file servers across the organization. Next, control access to files by applying safety net policies that use central access policies. For example, you could define who can access health information within the organization. Next, with dynamic access control, we can audit access to files by using central audit policies for compliance reporting and forensic analysis. For example, you could identify who accessed highly sensitive information. And finally, with dynamic access control, we can apply rights management services protection by using automatic RMS, rights management services, encryption for sensitive Microsoft Office documents. For example, you could configure RMS to encrypt all documents that contain Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act information. In other words, HIPAA information. It is important to note that dynamic access control uses the same Kerberos authentication that is used for Active Directory. In order to implement the use of dynamic access control, both Active Directory and group policy are used. Keep in mind there are numerous benefits to using dynamic access control, but let me highlight two of the more important ones. First is the ability to perform detailed file access auditing. With increasing government regulation, file access auditing is a critical responsibility or requirement of any corporation. Dynamic access control gives network administrators the ability to perform detailed audits on file access. The other significant benefit of dynamic access control that I would like to highlight is access denied assistance. Have you ever found yourself being denied access to a file? Prior to Server 2012, when being denied access to a file, all that you would see would be a message from the server stating that you've been denied access to that file. Well, now, with access denied assistance, you can get significantly more information, including information on who to contact in order to gain access to the file that you have been denied access to. Okay, so dynamic access control sounds great, right? But how exactly does it work? Well, let's take a look at a dynamic access control demonstration from Microsoft.
So we're going to show you now dynamic access control central access policies. And first of all, we're now on the domain controller. And on the domain controller, we have here in the Active Directory Administrative Center, we have here defined two central access policies that control access to data in files based on what the files are. And if we look at one of them, the department access policy, we can see that this is targeted at the files that are marked with a specific department, and the access says, allow access only if the user department equals the resource department. We also have another central access policy that protects high impact data, and this central access policy says that for all resources where impact equals high, we will only allow access to the owner of the data or the administrators or the system. So we define this in Active Directory. Now let's go to the file server to see how we can actually have these safety net central access policies take effect on the file server. So I'm switching to the file server here. And on the file server we have several shares. One of them is the department shares. So on this department share I'm going to now apply these central access policies. And I'm doing that by going to the Properties, Security, Advanced. And in here I have a new tab called Central Policy. When I go to that tab, I can now go ahead and apply Central Access Policy from Active Directory. And as you can see, we have these two Central Access Policies that we are now applying to these, which are the High Impact Access Rule and the Department Access Rule that we just seen in Active Directory. Now, the business owner of the data can go into the appropriate folder where data resides and tag the data as which department it's from. To do this, I'm going to go ahead to the finance department, and I'm going to right-click Properties, Classification, which is a new tab, and I can now assign a department to this folder, and I'm going to choose Finance. Once I did that, all the files under this folder are now tagged as Finance, and even if the file moves out, as long as it's on NTFS, it's going to be tagged as Finance. So we applied central access policies to all these shares, and we also tagged the information appropriately. You can see, for example, in the operation, I already pre-tagged it with the classification of department equals operations. So now let's go ahead to the user side and see how the users can access data based on these central access policies. So if I go now to my client machine, let's first see who this user is. So I'm going to PowerShell and I'm running the who am I, and I'm looking at the user claims in the user token, and I can see that the user is from the department operations and is from company Fabricam. So if he's from department operations, he should be able to access operations data but not finance data. Let's go ahead and give it a try. Let's go to the department shares, and in the department shares, as I said, the user can access operation data because he needs to do his job. But if he is kind of interested to see what's going on in the finance department, when he double clicks on this, he'll get access denied. And the access is denied because of the central access policy that says user.department needs to be equal to resource.department. You can also see that this access denied is actually much more contextual than the regular access denied that we've seen prior to Windows 8. And this is because we now allow the administrator to send a more contextual information to the user so that he can try and troubleshoot the issue himself, or he can also request assistance and send an email to the appropriate people on the file server so that they can help him. So let's say he did send this email and this got to the file server administrator. Now I'm going to switch back to the file server. As the administrator, I got this request to access my finance information, and I can go ahead and right-click Properties and go to Security Advanced, and then go ahead and look why this user did not have access to this data. So I'm going to select the user, which is Tim, and I'm going to say to view what's his effective access, which is basically why I didn't get data. And I can see here that it didn't get access to the data because of the department access rule that we've just seen configured in Active Directory. And now I can go to my central policy and say, okay, what's the department access rule? Oh, it's, user.department needs to be equal resource.department. So let me go ahead and see how I can actually help team get access to this data. I can go back to effective access and I can say, let me model what would happen if the department for team was the finance department. And I can see that now team will have access to the data if his department was finance. So I can not only see why team does not have access, I can also model what would happen if I change some of team's group permissions or claims so that I can potentially allow him to access the data. Now with this information at hand, I need to go ahead and, of course, if I decide to have team access the data, I need to add him to the finance department, which I can do if that's the right thing to do. But what we've shown you is the ability to apply safety net central access policies across the organization that are based on who the user is and what the information is, and also troubleshoot cases where the user does not have access to that information. Now let me show you another thing that's adding more dynamic evaluation into this equation. So up to now I tagged the files by the owner of the data. In this case I was the owner of the finance department. But let's say that somebody inadvertently took some file with private information such as credit card information and put it into some public shares. Now what's going to happen right now is that on this file server we also have automatic classification rules that look for information that is sensitive, that has credit card information, and mark this information as high impact. So if I go ahead and look at the classification now of this information, of this file, I will see that it's marked as impact equals high. Now you remember we had that central access policy that says for high impact files, users that are allowed to see them are only owners, administrators of the system. So if I go ahead and go back to the user, to the client machine, and I'm going to log in as team to the public shares, you'll see that team cannot even see that file because I also enabled another feature on this specific public share, which is access-based enumeration, that does not allow users to see files that they don't have access to. So what happens right now is that the file was put on the public shares, it got automatically classified as high impact, and the safety net access policy, central access policy for high impact kicked in and did not allow team to see it, so the team cannot even see that the file is there. So we're able to dynamically classify the data and then apply the right access policy based on this classification. Last but not least, let's see what happens for sensitive information that leaves the file server itself. So, the information is protected by the central access policies on the file server, but what happens if somebody takes that information and attaches it to an email and sends it out? For that specific type of sensitive information, for Office document, we're actually allowed to take a step further and RMS encrypt sensitive information so that even if it leaves the file server, it's still protected by that RMS encryption layer. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to take another file, which is on Teams desktop, and it also contains some confidential information. And I'm going to again copy it into the public shares. What the system does right now, it sees that there is a new file, it's going to automatically classify it as being high impact, and then it also has some rules to say, oh, if it's high impact, go ahead and write manage encrypt it, so that even if it's sent out of the server, it's going to be protected. So if we look at the file right now, if we open it, you see that now it's actually RMS encrypted, and it's encrypted with the high impact data template for the organization, so that now even if I have access to it and I inadvertently take it and attach it to an email, it's going to be still encrypted and protected to that template. So what we've seen is that we've seen the ability to tag data and apply policy based on who the user is and what the data is. We've also seen that we can both manually and automatically tag the data, and as a further step, we're also able to RMS encrypt specific sensitive data for Office documents so that even if the file leaves the file server, it's still protected by that RMS encryption layer that we apply to it. So to summarize, dynamic access control allows organizations to identify the data that they have, apply the right central access policies to control access to this data, audit access to the data so that they can use it for compliance and forensic analysis, and RMS encrypt specific sensitive Office information so that even if it leaves the organization's boundaries, it's still protected by that encryption technology.
So as you can see here, dynamic access control is a pretty powerful tool that's now available to us in Windows Server 2012. Okay, so hopefully this demonstration has given you a little better understanding of how to implement dynamic access control within Windows Server 2012. Okay, now let's take a look at some of the key terms for this week. The first one that you see here on this slide, access denied assistance, or assistant, we talked about this a little earlier. It's a dynamic access control feature that allows a user who has been denied access to a shared file or folder the ability to determine why they have been denied access. The access denied assistant can also direct the user to the owner of the data or someone who can provide access for that user. The next term you see there is authentication. You should be familiar with this term already. You've probably been introduced to authentication in previous courses, but it's a method that is used to verify the identity of a user. Authorization, another important term that you've probably also been introduced to before. That is the process of giving access to an authenticated user. The next term you see here on this slide, branch cache. That's a Windows File Services feature that speeds up access to information for branch offices. Information or data is cached locally for easier access, as opposed to having to access the information directly from the home office or over a WAN connection. The last term that you see here on this slide is network file system. This is a file storage solution for networks that consists of both Windows and non-Windows computers. Alternatively, server message block or SMB can be used on networks comprised solely of Windows computers. Okay, here on this slide we have the last four key terms that we'll take a look at. The first one is NFS data store, and that's a shared folder that exists within a failover cluster. The next term, server for NFS role. This allows administrators to extend the Active Directory schema in order to include Unix attributes, thereby giving administrators the ability to search the Active Directory database based on the included Unix attributes. The next term here on this slide, central access policy. This is a policy that is comprised of central access rules that can be used to give Active Directory objects, such as users and computers, the ability to access specific resources. And the last term that you see here, dynamic access control. This is new to Server 2012, and it provides a centralized method of creating and managing access and audit policies within Active Directory. thereby giving administrators the ability to secure data according to company policy and/or government regulations. Dynamic access control can be managed via the Active Directory Administrative Console. And finally, let's take a few minutes to go over the assignment for this week. Okay, as you can see here, the assignment starts out with a list of the assignment objectives. These are the weekly learning objectives that are addressed in the Week 3 assignment. Since we've already gone over all the weekly objectives, I will not go over them again here, but notice that weekly objectives 1 through 5 are addressed in the Week 3 assignment. Next, you see the purpose for this week's assignment, which is for you to learn how to configure advanced file solutions and dynamic access control. And next, on the assignment, you see the guidelines for creating and submitting your assignment. These are similar to every other week, but just make sure that you follow them. Okay, next are the assigned labs. These labs will be completed within the MOAC online lab environment that you've been using now for the first couple of weeks of this class. You can find information about accessing the MOAC labs online in the NT302 course syllabus. As we continue to look at the Week 3 assignment, notice that it is estimated that it will take you about 2 hours to complete all of the assigned labs. As you can see, the first lab for Week 3 is MOAC 70-412 Lab 5. In this lab, you will create an NFS shared folder, and you will also install and configure branch cache. The other lab that you have to complete as part of the Week 3 assignment is MOAC 70-412 Lab 6, which is where you will perform some tasks related to dynamic access control. In this lab, you will be using dynamic access control and creating a central access policy. Okay, since I'm already logged into the MOAC Labs online, let me switch over to that for just a second, and I'll show you where to access your 2 labs for this week. Okay, right here is where you see is Lab 5. This is your first lab for the week. And then over here beside it is Lab 6, your second lab for this week. Be sure that you download the lab manual for your step-by-step lab instructions. If you have any questions about the Week 3 assignment, be sure to contact your instructor. And this concludes part 2 of this Week 3 presentation. This is the final part of this Week 3 presentation.